Hey, John Hickok here. I want to talk to you about the differences between the AR-15 and the M16 from a political standpoint and a gun rights perspective. I see a lot of gun rights supporters going through great pains to explain the difference between an M16 and an AR-15. And yes, it can be frustrating because the media and sometimes the people on the left, a lot of times that want to ban guns, not everyone on the left, of course, just the people on the left who want to ban the guns, and some on the right, unfortunately, don't always understand what an AR-15 is, how it's different from an M16, all those kinds of things, and that can be frustrating, and it draws us in to trying to explain the difference between those two things. And it's important to know the difference, but the problem I have with making that a political statement is that whenever you try to explain the difference between an AR-15 and an M16 in a political gun rights conversation, the underlying message always seems to be unavoidable that somehow the M16 is bad and the AR-15 is good. And I have a problem with that because they're both essentially the same thing as far as our rights are concerned. Now first, before I explain kind of more in detail why I think that, let me first explain the differences for some of those who don't know. So I'm going to do what I just said I had a problem with, but it's important to know because there are differences, of course. Now the M16 is the military designation for what we might know that you can buy off the shelf in most states in America as the AR-15. Right, and the M16, of course, the rifle that first saw use in Vietnam and is still used by American troops. Now, the big difference between the M16 and the AR-15, there are lots of little differences depending on which one and brand and all those sorts of things, but the big difference is typically the M16 with the military designation is either fully automatic or has three-round burst, so select fire in some way. And the definition of fully automatic is if more than one round fires per pull of the trigger. That's basically, in a nutshell, the ATF definition of full auto, right? So that's the big difference, is full auto. Sometimes there's barrel length differences. Of course, we have restrictions in America per federal regulations about how long a barrel can be. So you get into the M4 versus AR-15, and that's a whole different thing. But the big difference between an M16 and an AR-15 is typically select fire, which means full auto. That's used, you can safe semi, full, safe semi, three-round burst, or even there's some firearms that have safe semi, three-round burst, and full auto. So there's the big difference. Now, I don't see this as being a big difference in the political debate, right? Because when you think about it, full auto, while mechanically, it's a very different thing to be able to just hold down the trigger and a bunch of rounds fire at 800, 900 rounds per minute versus you have to actually pull the trigger each time to fire a round. Mechanically, that is, of course, quite a noticeable and big difference. But as far as the actual use and the effectiveness of the rifle, I don't see it as very different at all. Because when we're talking about it politically, of course, we're not necessarily just talking about the mechanics of the rifle itself. We're talking about what the rifle does and the potential public safety issues and the Second Amendment issues and rights and self-defense and all those kinds of things. When all those factors come into play, the difference is negligible. I feel like, someone who somewhat has experience with an AR-15, can fire an AR-15 at close to, I would say, 300, 400, maybe 500 rounds a minute, something like that. Where full auto, you're not gonna, I don't care how good you are, what kind of trigger you got, you're not gonna quite match full auto speed. But as far as effectiveness, in a lot of ways, full auto is less effective. You talk to a lot of veterans, and they'll tell you they basically never use their rifles on full auto. In fact, after Vietnam, they went to the three-round burst because people were wasting ammo and not hitting anything because they were just running wild with full auto because they weren't trained properly, or of course you had the draft and everything that changed the element of different warfare, of course, than what we see now. So the differences are very small. So the problem with making that argument, making those differences out to be big, is that initially maybe it has some effect, right? Someone, some news anchor that doesn't understand things, sort of puts them in their place. Like, oh, okay, I guess I was an idiot. I didn't realize an AR-15 and M16 was different. But then when they really started thinking about it, they realized they're basically the same. And if you've already kind of assumed that this M16 is this dangerous military weapon, and wow, the AR-15 is pretty close, so we don't need those. The truth of the matter is, these aren't, M16s are not military assault weapons. They are civilian firearms that are used in a military capacity as well. So I think it's a very dangerous comparison when you're talking about the AR-15 versus the M16 politically. As far as I'm concerned, they're the same thing. We should be able to buy an M16 just as we can buy an AR-15. There's no difference. There's no reason that full auto should be illegal. There's not a huge advantage to full auto tactically, which is another reason why that certainly doesn't make the rifle any more dangerous or any more of a public safety hazard. So I think it's kind of a dangerous conversation. If I was ever, in that position, I don't care if they want to call it an M16. I don't care if you want to call my AR-15 an M16. It might as well be basically the same thing. Full auto is not a big difference tactically speaking. It does have some obviously applications tactically. I'm not an expert on that, but I know that it does have some applications. But it's just not a big enough difference to make a big deal about. And I don't like the implication that that's unavoidable when you make that argument politically that somehow the AR-15 is less dangerous than the M16. How dangerous they are is irrelevant. They're a weapon for self-defense, a tool, a hunting implement, an incredibly important part of the Second Amendment and our rights. So it's a dangerous comparison to make politically, I think, and I'd like to see more people just kind of stay away from it. And I've always liked the term, military. They use the term military-style assault weapon to try to demonize AR-15s and civilian gun ownership. But I always look at it, it's a civilian-style assault weapon, and I'm also not afraid of the term assault weapon. That doesn't scare me. Call it what you want. It is what it is, and it's important that we own them. If you're comfortable with owning something like an AR-15, it's important that we have them. It's a big part of the Second Amendment, and that's basically all I wanted to say. I just think it's a dangerous comparison. There's just one guy's opinion, so however you feel about it, but I think we need to be careful with making that distinction in the way that it's delivered as a political message, even though there are, of course, noticeable differences between the AR-15 and the M16. But anyways, just you guys let me know what you think in the comments. This is kind of just how I feel about it. I'm sure some of you guys disagree, and I'd be interested to hear your input. Really quickly, before I let you guys go, just wanted to remind you, in case you didn't see it, Gun Culture Radio, those of you that used to listen to that podcast, I've canceled that podcast, but I've restarted something I'm calling the John Hickok Show, which is going to be very similar. That's over on the John Hickok channel. So it's not going to be posted here. It's going to be posted over on the John Hickok channel. If I can remember to put a link in the description or something like that, I will. But you can just type John Hickok in and find it. And also, I, of course, appreciate you guys out there that support the people who support us, like budsgunshop.com, and people who are joining the NRA through our link. We appreciate you guys. And people who checked out sdi.edu, gunsmithing online distance learning program, and federal ammo. So we appreciate you guys who support the people who support us, and all the people over on the Gone Club on Patreon. I really appreciate you guys, and I'm going to make some more videos like this. And I don't mean to a big thing with gun rights is like people are people, and we all have, even when we agree on something, we have a different way of viewing how to go about achieving that goal, let's say, and especially with gun rights. A lot of us, of course, are on the same page about our rights, but a lot of us are not on the same page about how to go about achieving those rights. I think there are certain conversations that kind of can work against us that we get sucked into, and certain words. I hate to see us getting caught up with words like assault rifle and the term gun violence. We get caught up in these terms, and we kind of lose sight of what's important. And I want to make some more videos on that, and just kind of see what you guys think. Anyways, I appreciate it, and thanks for checking out the video, and I'll talk to you later.